There have been weeks of protests, of counter-protests, of political interventions.
They should be detained ahead of them being deported.
Culminating in this week's High Court ruling, concluding that this hotel in Essex can, for now at least, no longer house asylum seekers. What this ruling came down to was a breach of planning rules. Epping Council argued that because the hotel was no longer being used as such, i.e. you or I couldn't book a hotel room there, that they should have made a new planning application when they started housing asylum seekers. The Home Office tried to argue it was still a hotel, just one that they'd booked exclusively. But the judge disagreed, sparking fears from the government that other councils could follow suit. And that's exactly what the council housing this asylum hotel 6 miles down the road from Epping is planning to do.
It's not a knee-jerk reaction. We have written to the Home Office a couple of times. It is something that we've opposed right from the very start. Following this legal ruling, we feel that it's something that we should look at, and our legal team are doing just that.
And why do you want to close the hotel? Have you had issues there?
It's on the doorstep. It's been the #1 thing that comes up, bar none.
Steve Wortley says he got into politics to help with bins and schools. Nevertheless, as deputy leader of Broxbourne Council, which houses an asylum hotel, he now finds himself in the middle of a fiery national debate. Of course, all of this began under your party. Isn't this just political opportunism?
I fully respect that it was the hotel was opened under the Conservative government, and the electorate made that brutally clear at the last election. I think it's really important we learn by that, we acknowledge it, and we try and put things right.
The use of asylum hotels has increasingly become a political hot potato. The number used peaked in the summer of 2023 at over 400. By the time Labour came to power last year, it had almost halved to around 213. It now stands at around 210 hotels. The hotels are housing more than 32,000 asylum seekers, according to the latest data released in March. It's not just Broxbourne Council looking to challenge the government's use of asylum hotels. Nigel Farage says 12 councils that Reform UK run will do the same. Writing in The Telegraph, the Reform UK leader urged people concerned about the threat posed by young, undocumented males living in local hotels to follow the example of the town in Essex and peacefully protest. More troubling for the government, perhaps, is that today 2 Labour councils, Tamworth and Wirral, confirmed they too plan to explore blocking hotels being used for migrants.
It'll be for other local councils to decide how they want to proceed, and we are mindful of that. As I say, we're looking closely at the judgment. We'll put in place appropriate alternative accommodation arrangements for those who are currently located. But the bigger issue is the process of being able to more effectively and more quickly make decisions about people's asylum status. And we're able to evidence very significant progress with doing that.
Quick to share his position, Robert Jenrick encouraged other councils to fight the government.
Every patriotic council, whether Conservative, Reform, whatever, should follow Epping's lead and seek an injunction.
But other councils may not have the same legal grounds. Yesterday's ruling for Epping was unique, determined by the fact that some of the protests turned violent.
So we have the irreparable harm. We have issues of specific circumstances which crosses the threshold. Because usually when we have applications like that, they don't succeed.
The Epping protests began after an asylum seeker was charged for sexually assaulting a teenage girl. Now those who work with migrants fear they're all being tarnished.
These are not, in the main, people who commit crimes in the UK whilst claiming asylum. These are people who are genuine refugees who seek sanctuary and protection.
All the while, the political rhetoric keeps hardening and the small boats that fuel the crisis keep arriving. More than 50,000 since Labour came to power. And tomorrow morning, the latest immigration figures may yet put more pressure on the government.
Well, earlier I spoke to former Attorney General Dominic Grieve, and I began by asking him whether the court's decision to block Epping Hotel from housing asylum seekers drove a coach and horses through the entire policy of using hotels for that purpose.
It would if that were to happen, but it's not guaranteed that those other applicants will necessarily get an interim injunction. And I think if you read the judgment carefully, you can see that it is very fact-specific. but it calls into question the government's policy of housing asylum seekers in hotels, because the judge makes clear that there are grounds on which you can argue that using a hotel as an asylum hostel is a change of use, and that therefore it requires planning permission. The government hasn't taken any emergency powers to override that. And therefore, in the circumstances, each time the government is using a hotel as an asylum hostel, it runs the risk of such a challenge being made.
So should the government take emergency powers in order to force through the use of hotels for this purpose? Or should they basically construct detention centres or disperse asylum seekers into homes of multiple occupants, which poses different challenges?
All those things pose challenges. And if you're going to have detention, you're going to have to get military camps or old military camps and convert them for that purpose. And the government undoubtedly faces a problem because it has an obligation under the Refugee Convention and our own domestic law to process these asylum seekers. And also holding them in detention in itself is probably unlawful.
You opposed the last government's solution, which was to develop the Rwanda policy. Do you now think maybe you were mistaken, given the scale of public disquiet?
I didn't oppose it. I'm not in Parliament. I simply highlighted that I had some serious doubts that it was likely to be successful. Ultimately, breaking the business model is about providing very clear evidence that if people come into this country and seek asylum and have their asylum applications rejected, they are certain to be deported back to their country of origin. That's the thing which is most likely to provide a deterrent. The difficulty is that lots of people coming in believe that even if their asylum application fails, they will actually be able to disappear into the country. And even if they're living through the black market economy, they will survive here.
Well, you've also long opposed withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights. Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, is now reviewing whether that should be done. I mean, do you sort of question your own opposition in the past, or are you still certain that that would not be a good idea?
I think the European Convention on Human Rights is really peripheral to this issue. It's the Refugee Convention which absolutely underlies and underpins the way in which we process asylum applicants. But at the end of the day, the main reason why I think we're not removing people or having difficulty removing people is that they've destroyed their documents. And in many cases, the country of origin won't take them back. That needs a collective effort by Western democracies which are affected by this to persuade those countries that they have got to have these people taken back. And of course, I just point out that by leaving the European Union, some of our leverage on this is probably lost. So I think there are really difficult issues. There are moral issues here, and there are also practical issues.
A lot of people listening and, people who are thinking about voting for Reform UK might hear you speak and say, well, it's lawyers like you that have prevented successive governments from fixing this problem. Do you accept any share of the blame?
No, I don't. I don't think we failed to help the government fix this problem at all. Indeed, lawyers have been available to advise successive governments about ways in which the problems might be fixed. One of the problems, I have to say to you, is that governments don't always listen to their lawyers, and they tend to hair off in directions which they think may be electorally popular, but in fact never deliver anything.
Dominic Grieve, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.